On her way to a job interview in Asheville, Emily Carter spots a man slumped in the rain outside the Biltmore Hotel, bleeding. Ignored by every passerby, she offers him shelter for one night, never imagining he's the missing CEO of Borealis Dynamics. Something about his silence, his guarded gaze, feels like a secret begging to be uncovered. Why would a billionaire live like this, and why did he trust her? If you've ever felt that true worth lies beyond appearances, stay with us through this journey. Like this video, subscribe for more real stories, and share your thoughts in the comments. It means more than you think. Outside the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Charlotte, the air buzzed with quiet importance. Guests arrived in tailored suits and dresses sharp enough to reflect the lobby lights, one step away from red carpet perfection. Chauffeurs opened car doors with practiced poise, and valets nodded without looking anyone in the eye. Tonight's gala, hosted by the Carolina Equity Trust, was the kind of event where decisions worth millions were tucked inside small talk over shrimp cocktails. Emily Carter didn't belong there, not in her wrinkled blouse, not with the manila envelope in her purse, and certainly not with the drizzle matting her curls to her forehead. She wasn't attending the gala. She was there to deliver a job application personally, because the online portal had rejected her submission twice for missing data, though she'd triple-checked. She figured if she handed it directly to someone at the trust's hiring desk, maybe someone would see past her zip code. Maybe someone would actually read it. But the moment she reached the front steps, she froze. There, under the stone arch near the revolving door, sat a man, soaked through, his jacket torn at the shoulder, blood slowly trailing from a gash on his knee. People stepped over him. High heels clicked past. Polished shoes splashed near the hem of his jeans. No one paused. Emily hesitated, then walked past. Just for a few feet, just far enough to almost not see him. Then she turned back. Her sneakers squeaked on the marble tile as she stepped toward him. "You need something?" she asked, voice low but firm. He looked up. His face was hollow in a way that didn't come from hunger alone. She saw stubble that didn't quite cover the outline of someone once clean-shaven, and hands that held themselves still, like they used to hold something important. "I have water," she said, "and a first aid kit. You're bleeding." Still nothing from him, just that gaze. She crouched. Her jeans immediately soaked through. The blood looked worse up close, but it wasn't deep, just messy. She pulled out a small cloth from her tote, the one she usually used to clean her mother's glasses. "It's not much," she added, "but I'm 10 minutes from here. Small place. Just one night." He flinched slightly when she touched the wound, but didn't pull away. She caught herself explaining, "It's just temporary. I've got work tomorrow. I don't do this." Her fingers worked quickly. One night. That's it. A sharp burst of camera flash from behind caught her attention press outside the hotel. Maybe, but she didn't look. She was focused on the threat of blood and the weight of that stare. When she finished, she stood. "You coming or not?" He didn't answer, just rose, slowly, as if unused to standing in the presence of invitation. He didn't limp, though he should have. He didn't smile, but his eyes shifted like something softened. She turned, walking toward the corner, heart suddenly unsure if this was reckless or simply right. She didn't look back, but when she reached the light at 5th Street, she heard footsteps behind her. Slow, steady, and in his hand, the cloth she'd used was folded, not tossed. The sun had barely risen when Emily stirred. Her apartment on the 2nd floor of Grove Hill was quiet, except for the subtle hum of the heater, struggling against the early morning chill. The neighborhood hadn't seen new paint or pavement in years, and her building creaked like an old man with bad knees. But it was home, small, worn, and honest. She moved softly around the kitchen, heating water on the coil-top stove, toasting 2 slices of bread with the corner of her elbow, nudging the handle of the rusted toaster. Behind her, the couch-turned bed gave a soft rustle. She didn't turn, not yet. She had invited him in, but now in daylight, the decision felt fragile. He sat up slowly, his hand going to his knee, now wrapped in a clean bandage. Thank you, he said, voice still edged in gravel. For last night, I slept more than I have in weeks. She finally turned. He looked different in the pale light, less like a stranger, more like a question she hadn't decided to answer. What's your name? She asked, holding out a mug of warm water with lemon. It was all she had left before payday. Nathan, he replied. Nathan Reed. She blinked. The name landed without weight, but there was something in the way he said it, like he'd rehearsed being ordinary. They ate in silence. The toast crunched, and the lemon was too bitter, but neither of them complained. Emily watched him scan the room, her mother's oxygen tank tucked near the wall, the pile of folded laundry on a plastic chair, a corkboard covered with job applications and grocery coupons. He didn't comment. She appreciated that. He asked if he could fix the squeaky bathroom door. She hesitated, then nodded. It was one of those things she always meant to get to. As he worked, she sat by the window, absently checking her phone. A new notification appeared. She clicked without thinking. We're pleased to invite you to an interview at Ether Systems on Monday at 10 a.m. She stared at the screen. The application had been sent nearly 3 months ago. She had forgotten about it entirely. Her resume hadn't been updated, or so she thought. She rose and walked to the bathroom door. Nathan had just finished tightening the last screw, wiping his hands with a towel. Did you touch my laptop? She asked, voice neutral but tight. He met her gaze. You left it open. I only cleaned up the formatting. Some typos. That's all. You shouldn't have done that, I know. But I figured you wanted a chance. She didn't know what to say. It wasn't the invasion that unsettled her. It was the precision. The quiet way he had stepped into her life, not demanding, not boasting, just present. She returned to the kitchen, her mind trying to draw boundaries that her heart wasn't yet ready to define. Later that day, she found the toilet flushed without leaking, the kitchen cabinet aligned for the first time in months, and a sheet of job interview tips printed and placed beside her keys. There was no note. That night, when her mother wheezed in her sleep, Nathan emerged from the living room and refilled the humidifier before Emily even moved. He didn't ask if he should. He just did. She watched him from the hallway, her fingers tightening around the doorframe. The man had no place here, no reason to stay, no invitation beyond that first impulsive offer. And yet, there he was, folding a dish towel as if he'd done it all his life. And in that quiet rhythm, something shifted in her. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of something she couldn't name. The Ether Systems building stood like a slab of polished ambition in the heart of downtown Asheville. Its glass facade reflected the gray sky, and its clean lines screamed efficiency. Emily stood at the entrance with her tote bag clutched tighter than usual, palms damp despite the early spring chill. She had dressed in her best, an off-brand blazer that still held the scent of lavender detergent, and a pair of shoes she only wore to weddings and funerals. Her mother had wished her luck before she left, voice raspy, but eyes alert. Inside, everything smelled like expensive carpet and silent judgment. She was led to a conference room by a young assistant who smiled too quickly and disappeared too fast. The HR director, a woman named Dana, welcomed her with a tone that was neither warm nor cold, just efficient. Emily expected the usual questions. Why do you want this job? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? But instead, Dana flipped through her resume and asked about systems-level redundancy metrics and her experience managing collaborative team platforms. Emily blinked. She knew she had touched those terms once in a blog or maybe a free course, but not with any fluency, and yet they were now, inexplicably, woven into the updated resume sitting on the table. By the end of the interview, Dana smiled. You're sharper than you let on, she said. We'll be in touch. Emily stepped out of the building dazed. The wind felt sharper than before, or maybe her breath had turned shallow. On the walk back home, one thought followed her like a quiet drumbeat. He touched it. He went into my files. That evening, she found Nathan in the kitchen, slicing carrots like it was something he'd done for years. She placed her bag down slowly. Did you open my laptop? Her voice was steady, but there was a current under it. He didn't stop slicing. You left it open. I only adjusted grammar, smoothed the layout, didn't touch the content. You added skills I don't have. He paused, then resumed cutting, slower. You do. You just don't say them out loud. She didn't know if she should be angry or grateful, or both. I got invited back for the next round. He didn't smile, just nodded once and said, "Good. Later." When he handed her a mug of tea chamomile, the one she kept for nights when her mother coughed too much, he didn't offer an apology or a speech. He just set it down and went back to reading. She sat across from him at the small fold-out table they used for everything from meals to laundry folding. "What were you before?" she asked, not entirely meaning to. He looked up. His eyes didn't flinch. Someone with too many titles and not enough time. That's not an answer. He tilted his head slightly. "I used to believe that what you built defined who you were. Now I think it's what you fix after it all breaks." She let the silence settle. It was the kind that didn't demand to be filled. After he went to the living room and turned on the news, Emily stayed back to clean. As she picked up his phone left behind by the sink, its screen lit up with an open article. She didn't mean to read it, but her eyes caught the headline anyway. David Allener, CEO of Borealis Dynamics, missing for 4 weeks. No confirmed sightings. She froze. The face in the picture wasn't just similar, it was exact. Same jawline, same crease at the brow, same eyes though in the photo. They were sharper, cleaner. She looked toward the living room. The couch was empty. The news anchor's voice crackled from the other room, narrating weather patterns. But Nathan was gone. She stepped outside onto the stairwell. No sound of steps, no sign of him down the hallway. The wind had picked up, scattering leaves from the tree near the street lamp. She returned inside, shut the door slowly, and leaned against it. The tea on the table had gone cold, but the cloth napkin he had folded next to it still held the faint smell of lemon soap and steel. Emily hadn't slept. Not really. She dozed in fragments, ears tuned to any creak in the hallway, any turn of the doorknob, any sound that might signal Nathan's return. But the hours passed, with nothing but wind brushing the windows and the wheeze of her mother's breathing through the bedroom door. At 4:17 a.m., the front lock clicked softly. She sat up from the couch without turning on the light. Nathan stepped inside, quiet and composed, holding a plastic bag with a bottle of cough syrup, tissues, and a paperback novel with a frayed spine. He closed the door, set the bag down, and didn't flinch when he saw her sitting there. "I didn't think you'd still be up," he said, voice low. "I didn't think you'd come back," she replied. He gave a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He didn't explain where he'd gone. He didn't ask if she'd seen the article. He just stood there, as if waiting for permission to sit in his own silence. Emily stood. "You disappeared. I needed air. You left your phone open." He paused, then nodded. "Once. Then I guess you know." She crossed her arms. "I know someone named David Allener is missing, that he ran Borealis, that he looks exactly like you." Nathan exhaled through his nose. "David was the name I used for business. PR said it sounded sharper, easier to remember, but it was never who I really was." He met her gaze. "Nathan Reed is my name, the one I gave up when I stopped being a person and started being a title." Emily didn't move. Her body tensed, unsure if it wanted to push him away or pull him back into the living room where he had fixed her door and folded her laundry like he was trying to earn a place. "Why here?" she asked. "Why this city? Why me?" He looked down. "Because no one here knew me, and because you looked at me like I was still a man, not a headline." She wanted to believe him, but she wasn't sure what she believed anymore. That morning, she made coffee. He repaired the loose leg on her kitchen chair. Nothing was said about the night, but the air between them had changed, not cracked, not broken, just thinned, like a surface tension stretched too far. Later that week, she caught him watching a news segment about Preston Hale, the current CEO of Granite Haven. The anchor mentioned his upcoming expansion proposal. Nathan didn't blink, but she noticed how tightly he held the mug in his hand. White-knuckled, silent. That night, while reviewing old job documents, Emily pulled up a forgotten PDF, one of her father's bookmarked articles from the year before he passed, Borealis Dynamics. A New Era, it read. The first name on the founding board was Nathan D. Reed. Her breath caught. She leaned back in the chair. Nathan D. Reed, not David. The D hadn't stood for a middle name. It had been the bridge he burned behind him. When she returned to the living room, Nathan was asleep on the couch, arms crossed, the same frayed paperback resting on his chest. She watched him for a moment longer than she meant to, then turned off the lamp. The next day, they moved around each other like people with a shared secret, but no agreement on how to carry it. She never asked what had really happened between him and the company, and he never offered. But from that moment on, when she set the dinner table, she placed 2 forks instead of 1. The call from Ether came on a Wednesday morning, just as Emily was packing leftovers for her mother. The voice on the other end was clipped but kind. We'd like to offer you a trial assignment in our data coordination team. If it goes well, we'll consider making it permanent. Emily had nodded before she could even think, then thanked them too many times and hung up with shaking fingers. Nathan was sitting at the table, sipping coffee, eyes unreadable. She told him quietly. He didn't say, "I told you so." He just asked when it started. Monday, she said, and that was that. The Ether Systems branch was located off Brevard Road, tucked behind a retail center and a pharmacy. The building looked modest from the outside, but inside it buzzed with quiet productivity. Emily's role was to help migrate data between internal platforms, tedious, sometimes repetitive, but it paid better than anything she'd had before. And there was coffee that didn't taste like metal. She was careful, grateful, even. But she couldn't stop noticing how fast people talked around her, how acronyms flew like code, how her supervisor, a woman named Kayla, watched her like a well-meaning hawk. On day 4, while cross-checking entries in the employee history database, Emily stumbled on a name that froze her hand above the keyboard. Nathan D. Reed. There was no photo, no title, just a status inactive, terminated pending internal investigation. Years 09-14-2021. And under notes, record sealed per legal review, all access restricted. She stared at the screen, then printed a copy and tucked it in the bottom of her bag without knowing why. That afternoon, rain fell in sheets across Grove Hill. Emily's mother had insisted on walking to the corner store for tea and came back soaked, pale, trembling. 10 minutes later, she fainted. It was Nathan who caught her. Emily stood frozen as he lifted the older woman with startling care, cradled her against his chest, and carried her to bed. He checked her pulse, dampened a towel, adjusted her pillows. Not once did he look at Emily for instruction. "She needs electrolytes," he said softly. "I'll make broth." Emily followed him to the kitchen, where he moved with quiet efficiency. As he stirred, she leaned against the doorway, watching this man who might once have managed millions slice ginger into tiny slivers. "You don't have to do all this," she said. He didn't look up, and yet I'm doing it. She stepped closer. Her voice dropped. "You could leave any time." He set the spoon down, wiped his hands on a dishcloth. "And you could ask me to." Later that evening, when her mother stirred and blinked at him through glassy eyes, she whispered, "He looks like your father, back when we still had the Buick." Emily swallowed. There was something about the way her mother said it, not with fear, but with a strange peace that caught her off guard. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Emily took out the printed file from her bag. She stared at Nathan's name, the sealed record, the way truth seemed to hide in plain sight. She didn't confront him, didn't ask about the investigation or why his record had been buried. She just folded the paper once, then again, slid it into a drawer. And the next morning, when Nathan came out to make coffee, he saw the kitchen table cleared, no loose documents left behind. only a second mug waiting beside hers, already warm. Friday mornings at Ether Systems were usually quiet, just the soft click of keyboards and the occasional buzz from the copier. Emily liked that. It gave her space to breathe, to focus, to forget how many stairs her mother couldn't climb anymore. Her task that day was simple cross-check archival schematics with the updated digital database. Most files were routine, dates, signatures, diagrams that had long since lost their urgency, until one of the older binders slipped. It wasn't dramatic, just a silent slide off a crowded shelf. When she picked it up, a folder tucked inside spilled open. Its pages were yellowed, the ink faint. But on the last page, a rough printout of a building-wide security schematic, there was a note scribbled diagonally in tight, exact handwriting, N.R. She stood there a full minute before moving again. Nathan Reed. The date matched the quarter Borealis Dynamics had spiraled. Emily remembered the headlines, some vague talk about a hostile acquisition, but no details ever made the evening news. Granite Haven took control. Everything was cleaned, folded, and filed into silence. She placed the file in her bag without asking herself why. That evening, the apartment smelled of garlic and thyme. Nathan stood at the stove, sleeves rolled up, stirring something that looked far better than anything Emily had managed all week. She watched him from the doorway, the folder still zipped into her purse. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. He turned, saw her face, then saw the papers in her hand. "I didn't steal anything," she said, "but this fell out at work, and it has your initials." He wiped his hands on a towel, reached for the page. He didn't pretend not to recognize it. His eyes darkened. He lowered into the nearest chair like someone sitting down to face an old photograph that had waited too long to be looked at. "This," he said quietly, "is the layout I built when we were reconfiguring data access protocols." Preston hated it, said it made internal checks too transparent. A year later, he submitted a version with those lines removed, and 6 months after that, he used the missing controls to move funds offshore. Emily listened. No interruptions. No judgments. "I didn't know." Nathan continued, "Until it was too late. I went to the board, told them what I found. But Preston was ready. He had documents, voice memos, manufactured things. They didn't care what was true. They cared what could be managed. And so," Emily said, "they let you go." "No. They erased me." He ran a hand through his hair, eyes tired. Preston promised the board a clean exit. Said I'd agreed to disappear. Public relations scrubbed everything, even the name on the door. Silence stretched long between them. "So, why me?" she finally asked. He looked up, not defensive, just tired of carrying the answer alone. "Because you didn't ask what I did. You asked where it hurt." Emily didn't answer right away. She just walked to the counter, turned on the old coffee machine. It sputtered, hissed, refused to brew. She swore under her breath. Nathan chuckled, rose from the chair, and knelt beside it. "Let's fix it." They pulled the machine apart with spoons and butter knives. Somehow, between broken screws and clumsy fittings, they laughed, really laughed. She forgot the folder. He forgot the boardroom. When the machine coughed out its first bitter drip, she let out a cheer loud enough to startle the cat from next door. They brought their mugs to the small balcony. The rain had left the Grove Hill rooftops glistening, and the streetlights turned puddles into patches of molten gold. A child's voice called out from the stairwell across the way. "Hey, Miss Emily, is that your new dad?" She froze. Nathan's mug paused mid-air. The child ducked back inside, not waiting for an answer. Emily stared ahead, face unreadable, beside her. Nathan just sipped his coffee and smiled. By the time Emily received the official job offer, the morning sun had barely stretched across Grove Hill's broken sidewalks. She read the email twice, then a third time just to be sure. Permanent hire, benefits starting the following month, a staff ID that wasn't temporary. She didn't cry, but her throat tightened the way it did when her mother used to whisper, "You're doing more than enough." That night, she invited Nathan to celebrate. Rosemary Table sat on a quiet block near Pack Square Park. Not fancy, but warm. Exposed brick, local art on the walls, wine bottles stored above shelves like quiet trophies. Nathan wore a button-down shirt Emily hadn't seen before, sleeves crisp and collar folded neatly. He had shaved, even his posture shifted, still quiet, but no longer invisible. The hostess sat them near the window. Candles glowed on each table. The menu was seasonal, expensive in a way Emily used to avoid, but tonight she let herself want things: rosemary chicken, warm sourdough, laughter that didn't have to end at the front door of a rented apartment. They hadn't even ordered drinks when two people from Ether walked in. Emily, a voice called, sharp with surprise. It was Claire from finance, and another guy, Bradley, maybe from procurement. Claire's eyes flicked between them. "Didn't know you had such interesting taste," she said, voice edged with sugar. "Nice to see you out. Enjoy your date." She smiled and walked on. Emily forced a polite nod. Nathan didn't say anything, but his jaw had set ever so slightly. The moment passed, but it didn't pass. When the appetizers came, Emily hadn't touched hers. She stirred the soup without tasting it. "They think I'm using you," she said flatly, "that I'm climbing up your back to get where they think I don't belong." Nathan looked at her, calm. "Let them think. You don't care. I've cared about too many opinions. I'm done with noise. Now I pay attention to what people do." She swallowed. "You make it sound easy. It's not." He tilted his head, eyes soft, but truth rarely is. Later, walking back under street lamps and misted air, Emily hesitated before speaking. "If one day," she said, "I asked you to step fully into my world, not just dinner, not just fixing doors, but all of it. The rent checks, the broken plumbing, the nights my mom forgets what month it is. Would you still come?" Nathan didn't answer. He just looked at her, not away, not down, just at her. That night, she didn't expect him to show up again. She turned off the lights early, wrapped herself in a sweatshirt, tried to let the day fade, but around 10, there was a knock. He stood outside holding 2 grocery bags. In one, a new pillow wrapped in plastic. In the other, a pair of cozy pajamas women's size M, navy blue with soft buttons and sleeves thick enough for a cold room. "I noticed your mom's set was thinning," he said. Emily opened the door without speaking. He didn't step in, not yet. Then she moved aside, and he walked through. The invitation came on a Wednesday, tucked in between shift emails and payroll updates. Granite Haven's annual appreciation gala, semi-formal attire, attendance encouraged. Emily stared at it for a long time before closing her laptop. It was Kayla, her supervisor, who nudged. "You should go. It's good visibility. Plus, they're catering from Asheville proper this year. Worth it for the short ribs alone." Emily nodded slowly. She didn't own anything semi-formal. But 2 days later, she stood in front of the mirror wearing a navy blue dress she'd borrowed from her cousin, her curls tucked back with cheap pins that somehow stayed in place. Nathan waited by the curb in his usual jacket. When he saw her, he gave a soft whistle, then a small bow that made her laugh, but he didn't step out of the car. "You're not coming in?" she asked. He looked at the Grand Magnolia Hotel entrance. Spotlights lit up the awning, casting the word granite in gold on polished marble. Guests walked up in tailored suits and sharp heels, coats folded over arms like armor. "I've been inside that place," he said. "But tonight's not for me. You helped build the company," she said. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "And then they rebuilt it without me." Inside the ballroom, the music was soft jazz, and the lights dimmed just enough to blur imperfections. Emily walked carefully, heels foreign under her feet. People moved like they belonged, gliding between name tags and flutes of champagne. She edged toward the refreshment table, seeking something that resembled water. A child suddenly darted through the crowd, chased by a tired-looking nanny. In one blur of motion, his small hand knocked a glass of orange juice off a tray. It splashed across Emily's skirt. Gasps, a few chuckles. Someone muttered, "Typical." Before she could step back, a man moved between her and the growing attention. "It's nothing," he said. "In fact, I think she just became the most interesting person in the room." Emily looked up. The man was tall, tanned, suit precise. He handed her a napkin and added, "It's always the unexpected ones who turn the tide." "Thank you," she said, recovering her breath. "Preston Hale," he introduced. Her eyes froze. She tried not to react. He didn't linger, just nodded once more and disappeared into a swirl of conversation and polished laughter. Emily turned, found the restroom, cleaned herself as best she could, and slipped out through the side hallway. The air outside was cool against her skin. She stood near the stone pillars, breathing. A man passed her in the lobby holding a folded newspaper. As he turned, he said to someone beside him, "Still no word on that missing CEO David Allener. I swear I saw someone who looked just like him at the Grove last week." Emily's heart jolted. On the ride home, her phone buzzed, just her mother. She answered with a tired smile. "Where are you?" her mother asked. "There's something on TV. At home." The living room glowed with the soft flicker of local news. A special segment was airing the disappearance of a dynasty. The reporter spoke of Borealis Dynamics, the merger, and the mysterious vanishing of its original CEO and co-founder. Emily sat down slowly. Preston Hale. The only name that stayed, the only face that returned to the headlines. Until they showed the photo of the final board meeting. Standing at the edge, almost cropped out, blurred by distance but unmistakable, was Nathan. He wasn't erased, just buried. Emily didn't sleep that night. Not really. Her body lay still under the quilt, but her mind never stopped combing through the pieces scattered headlines, closed folders, that flicker of Nathan's face in a forgotten news report. At dawn, she rose without brushing her hair, pulled on a cardigan, and crouched beside the dusty bin Nathan had tucked beneath the bookshelf weeks ago. Most of it was business clutter, old notebooks, torn receipts, annotated printouts of financial statements she didn't understand. But near the bottom, beneath a manila envelope that had warped with time, she found a memo printed on stiff corporate letterhead. Her eyes scanned the heading. Borealis Dynamics, Executive Action Memorandum. Her breath caught, midway down the page. In stark font, it read, "Nathan D. Reed. Position as CEO officially revoked under Clause 12.4 of Board Charter." The sentence had been crossed through with a ballpoint pen, jagged and angry. Just beneath it, a handwritten note in the margin. Situation contained. P. Hale. She stared at it for several seconds before moving. Her hands trembled slightly, but her steps were steady as she opened the back door. The sun was barely up. Cool morning light brushed across the Grove Hill complex, painting cracked concrete with a gentler tone. Nathan sat on the narrow bench outside, elbows on knees, hands hanging between. He looked up at her, not startled, not surprised. She held out the memo. He didn't reach for it at first, only studied her face. "You were everything," she said softly, "and they erased you, not just from the company, from the story." He looked at the paper in her hand for a long moment. Then he took it. His fingers didn't shake. He read, slowly. When he reached the note from Preston, a corner of his lip lifted not in humor, in recognition. "I let them do it," he said at last. "There comes a moment when losing your name hurts less than losing what it stood for." Emily sat down beside him, but didn't speak, not right away. "My dad worked janitorial at Borealis," she said after a pause. "My uncle handled logistics. When the merger happened, they were among the first to be let go. We lost our house 3 months later. My mom started cleaning again. I left college." Nathan's face stayed still, but his eyes closed. "Did you know?" she asked. He nodded. "I read every redundancy list. I remembered your last name. Carter. I didn't come to make it right. Emily, that's not possible. I came because I couldn't stay hidden knowing people like your family paid for someone else's greed. Emily stood abruptly. Her voice was barely audible. You're the son of the man who destroyed my family. She didn't wait for a response. She went inside, quietly closing the door. On the other side, Nathan remained where he was, memo folded on his lap, hands open like he wasn't holding anything at all. Emily spent the week inventing ways not to be home. She asked for extra shifts, took longer routes on the bus, sorted paperwork no one had asked her to touch. At night, she'd eat early with her mother, wash the dishes with unnecessary care, and close the bedroom door before Nathan could return from wherever he disappeared to during the day. He never asked where she'd been, never knocked. But when her mother's cough deepened and the medication ran out, Nathan was the one who knocked gently on the door with a new bottle in hand. When the heating unit rattled and then died during a cold snap, he didn't speak, just returned with a toolkit, fixed it, and left without a word. She told herself it didn't mean anything, that it was penance, guilt, that maybe he did it for himself more than for her. Until Friday afternoon, when she found the envelope. It sat among unpaid bills and flyers in the mailbox. No name, no return address. Inside were 3 things: a stamped receipt showing the last 3 months of rent had been paid in full, a photocopy of a grant approval letter bearing the seal of the Asheville Foundation, awarding a memorial scholarship in the name of James Carter, and a handwritten note in simple block letters, for the man who built more than structures, for the name that shouldn't be forgotten. She stared at the note for a long time, then walked. The old print shop was now a youth center, humming with weekend activity. Children played in the hallway. Posters lined the walls. At the far end, just above a newly painted doorway, hung a small bronze plaque in memory of James Carter, a man who built things with his bare hands. The words stopped her like a physical force. She blinked quickly, then found the center's director. Who put that up, she asked. He smiled. Some quiet guy. Said your father worked here, paid for the renovation, didn't want a ceremony, just asked for that plaque. She said thank you, though her voice caught. That evening, she returned home slower than usual. Her mother sat on the couch, a blanket across her knees, and a mug of warm tea beside her. She didn't ask questions, just said, with a voice barely above a whisper, he never said sorry, just brought back what your father deserved. Emily nodded, eyes down. Later, in the quiet of her room. She turned on her phone, opened the message app. Her fingers hesitated before she typed, I don't know if I can forgive you, but I also can't pretend none of it ever happened. She didn't wait for a reply. Nathan and Emily walked slowly through the quiet streets of Asheville, the soft crunch of fallen leaves beneath their feet, marking the passage of time more than any words could. The air was crisp, carrying a faint scent of wood smoke and earth, a reminder of the approaching fall. They made their way to Pack Square, a place layered with memories not just theirs, but the city's, its people's. They found an empty bench near the center of the square, the very spot where 2 years ago a crowd had gathered in protest. Signs had waved, voices had risen, but the wounds beneath remained just beneath the surface, unseen by many but palpable for those who had lived it. Nathan sat first, brushing dust from the seat before offering it to Emily. She hesitated only a moment before sitting down, folding her hands in her lap, eyes scanning the stone plaza, as if searching for answers in the patterns of shadows cast by the towering trees. He looked at her then, a weight behind his gaze, and began to speak quietly. My father was a man who believed power was the currency of the world. Everything, everyone, could be bought or broken if the price was right. His voice held no bitterness, only a weary truth. I used to believe him too, until I saw the forged payroll documents, the ones he signed with his own hand. I reported it. That's when I was pushed out. Emily's brow furrowed, the silent question lingering between them. So, if you hadn't betrayed your father, you would still be the CEO. He nodded slowly. Yes, but I chose not to follow him. I chose you. The word you came soft, not as a formal address, but something intimate. Real. Emily's heart tightened at the sound. She said nothing for a moment, but her fingers twitched as his hand brushed lightly against hers, grounding both of them in that fragile connection. "I haven't forgiven you," she said finally, her voice steady but quiet. "But I don't want to stop remembering you either." They sat side by side, silence filling the space where words once were. As the sun slipped beneath the town hall's peaked roof, a tattered banner fluttered overhead on a nearby lamppost. It bore the faded slogan of Borealis Dynamics, "Build what matters." The phrase, once a corporate mantra, now felt like a quiet benediction for two people who had lost more than titles or positions. They had lost a part of themselves. The evening settled around them like a slow breath. Nathan's gaze drifted upward, tracing the last light as it bled into the darkening sky. Emily's eyes remained fixed on the worn stones below, where countless footsteps had crossed paths over the years. They both carried scars, some visible, many hidden. Yet here, on that bench in Pack Square, the weight of the past seemed lighter for a moment, held not by power or pride, but by a fragile thread of trust. Nathan's voice broke the stillness, a whisper carried by the wind. "We may have lost much, but there's still a chance to build something real." Emily's lips curved, just a hint. Maybe it starts with truth. Neither moved to speak again as the city lights began to flicker on, illuminating the quiet streets and the stories still unfolding beneath them. She didn't look back, but he knew something had changed. Emily and Nathan stood outside the rundown building, its brick walls stained with years of neglect and faded graffiti. The structure had once been a community center, a beacon for the neighborhood. Now it was nothing more than a shadow of its former self. Its doors chained shut, windows cracked or boarded over. The autumn wind stirred the dry leaves around their feet as they exchanged determined looks. This was to be their new beginning, not just for themselves, but for the youth who had been forgotten by the city. They'd spent weeks pitching their idea to city officials, local schools, and community leaders, an initiative to transform this derelict space into a vocational training center aimed at helping Asheville's struggling young people find skills and hope. At first, skepticism was thick in the air. You want to take on a project like this with zero experience managing anything like it? One official had scoffed. "And you're expecting volunteers? This isn't charity, it's hard work. Are you prepared for that?" But Nathan, calm and unshaken, had only nodded. "We don't want to be heroes or names on a plaque. We want to build something that lasts. The work matters more than the credit." Emily had taken the lead in forging relationships with public schools, setting up workshops on everything from basic repairs to resume writing, interview skills, and personal finance. Nathan handled the technical side, managing donations, equipment refurbishing, and facility repairs. Slowly, the community's attitude began to shift. Those who once doubted now watched with quiet curiosity. The children who had roamed the streets, restless and aimless, began showing up with hesitant smiles, eager to learn and contribute. Opening day arrived with a modest ceremony. A group of volunteers, mostly teenagers who had wandered the city's corners, stood ready to usher in the new chapter. Emily noticed a little girl step forward carrying a crude but heartfelt drawing. It depicted a woman, strong and kind, standing beside a man in a simple blue shirt. Above the man's head, in large, uneven letters, were the words, "Mr. N." The girl handed the picture to Emily, who felt a lump in her throat. It was more than a drawing, it was a symbol of trust and hope. As the sun dipped low behind the Appalachian hills, cameras from local news crews began arriving. Rumors had already spread that Nathan Reed, the former CEO who vanished from public life after a scandal, was behind the project. Emily braced herself for the backlash, expecting headlines laced with suspicion and accusations. Instead, the first reports told a different story, the man who builds from the ground up. The articles praised Nathan's commitment to genuine change, highlighting how his work with Emily was breathing life back into forgotten neighborhoods. The unexpected positive attention brought a fresh wave of support. Donations increased, volunteers joined, and local officials started to pay more serious attention to their mission. Nathan's quiet humility contrasted sharply with the sharp suits and polished smiles of corporate life he had left behind. Here, on the ground floor of a worn building, he was something more real. One evening, as they locked up after another long day, the distant voices of children calling out drifted through the cooling air. Miss Carter. When is Mr. Nathan coming back to teach again? Emily looked toward the fading light, feeling the weight of the journey so far. It wasn't just about rebuilding a building or a reputation. It was about mending fractured lives, starting at the roots. Nathan didn't answer immediately, but in his eyes was a flicker of something she hadn't seen before: renewed purpose, a kind of quiet strength. And somewhere in that moment, both of them knew this was only the beginning. That Saturday afternoon, sunlight filtered through the high windows of the old community center, dust motes dancing in the beams like tiny fireflies. Emily was bent over the tall bookshelf, straightening donated novels down to the last copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, when a child's voice rang out behind her. "Daddy, look what I made." She turned, pausing mid-reach, and saw a small boy sprinting toward Nathan, a bright drawing clutched in his hand. The boy's scuffed sneakers pounded the worn linoleum, and his eyes shone with excitement. Nathan looked up from the table where he'd been swapping out light bulbs, his sleeves rolled up, forearms speckled with paint from the morning's work. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The boy stopped just shy of Nathan, raising the paper high, a simple house with windows and a red roof, smoke curling from the chimney. Above the house, scrawled in a child's hasty letters, was Dad. Nathan blinked, then knelt so he was eye level with the boy. He didn't correct him. He didn't shake his head. Instead, he reached out, gently smoothing the child's tangled hair, and smiled in a way that lit every corner of the room. Emily's chest tightened, not because the boy had called him Dad, but because Nathan didn't deny it. She waited, breath caught in her throat, wondering if he'd say anything, but he only folded the drawing carefully and said, "This is the best house I've ever seen." The boy beamed and ran back to a group of other children who clapped in approval. Nathan stood and tucked the drawing into the front pocket of his shirt. Emily approached quietly, noticing how Nathan's posture straightened, how his shoulders seemed less hunched than they had been for so many weeks. "Hey," she said softly. Her voice held no accusation, only observation. He looked at her, eyes warm but serious. "He reminded me I can be someone's hero again." She nodded, understanding more in that moment than any words could convey. Later, as they locked up the center and walked toward the old train depot on South Lexington Avenue, the evening air grew cooler. The depot had been repurposed as a mural gallery, but retained its rusted tracks and creaking iron gates. It was here that they had first shared stories of loss and regret. Emily stopped at the edge of the platform, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You know," she said, looking down the length of the tracks, "I used to think I could never trust anyone who stepped into my life under a lie." He joined her, standing close enough that she felt the heat from his coat. And now she turned, the twilight casting soft shadows across her features. "I don't know when I started to trust you, but I did." Nathan reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. The sound of a distant train whistle echoed through the empty yard, a lonely call that stirred memories of arrivals and departures. They stood in silence, the tracks stretching before them like a promise or a warning, neither of which mattered at that moment. Then a sudden flurry of camera flashes broke the stillness. Reporters and photographers appeared at the locked gate, microphones thrust forward. One reporter, her badge glinting in the fading light, called out, "Mr. Nathan Reed, are you prepared to testify before Granite Haven's Internal Review Board next week?" Nathan met the reporter's gaze, calm and unwavering. He glanced at Emily for a fraction of a second, as if seeking permission or sharing resolve. Then he turned back. "I have been silent for too long," he said, voice carrying across the tracks. The reporters surged forward, but Emily reached out and gently guided Nathan away, her grip firm as they walked from the depot toward the center's back door. In the golden haze of the setting sun, Emily realized that this moment public scrutiny mixed with personal confession was the turning point. Nathan wasn't just a man reclaiming a title, he was a man reclaiming himself. And as they disappeared into the warm glow of the community center's windows, the old tracks held no power over them. It was their turn to write the next chapter, together. The main conference room at Granite Haven's headquarters in uptown Charlotte was a polished expanse of mahogany and glass. Rows of seats faced a raised dais, where the board usually dispensed corporate edicts with practiced precision. Today, however, the mood was taut, an emergency shareholders meeting called at the 11th hour. Lawyers in gray suits murmured in clusters, while institutional investors tapped briefcases like metronomes. The overhead lights hummed low, reflecting off the polished table that stretched like a gauntlet between the dais and the seats. Preston Hale entered through the side door with the confident gait of a CEO, assured of his dominion. His tie was perfectly knotted, his posture unflinching. Yet, as his footsteps echoed through the near-empty aisle, he froze at the sight of Nathan Reed occupying the front row. Nathan's appearance was unremarkable to an untrained eye, a simple navy blazer, crisp shirt, hands folded, yet the weight of his presence shifted the room's balance. Investors glanced at each other, eyebrows arching. Before Preston could clear his throat, the room darkened for a video presentation. A single screen descended from the ceiling, and an image flickered into focus the old boardroom at Borealis Dynamics. Rings of light highlighting faces caught in the act. Voice memos played through hidden speakers, crisp and deliberate. First, the sound of keynote speakers, then the unmistakable shuffle of paper, the click of a recorder being turned on. The evidence Nathan had unearthed rolled out one detail at a time: doctored accounting ledgers, internal transfer requests with forged signatures, and finally, the damning recording of a board meeting where Preston's voice commanded the removal of the CEO. Just let it go. The recording began in Preston's smooth voice, laced with disdain. Nobody will miss a naive CEO. Priority is stability. The camera panned to show board members nodding. The tension in the room became a tangible thing. Someone's phone buzzed, its light blinking ironically against the darkness. The final clip was the most potent Preston, leaning back in his chair, eyes cold. We'll manage the narrative. Reed disappears. We all move forward. Silence enveloped the screen as the recording ended. For a moment, no one breathed. Then a tall woman in the Financial Oversight Committee rose slowly. Her voice cracked like a gavel when she spoke. Mr. Hale, the board of directors has reviewed this evidence. We request your immediate resignation. There was no applause, no murmurs, just the soft click of Preston's shoes as he stood. Tie skewed slightly from the sudden movement. Preston's face flickered between surprise and controlled anger. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but the room's weight pressed down. He bowed his head once, then swept past the dais, disappearing through the same side door he had entered. The lights slowly brightened again. Nathan rose and moved to the dais, passing under the relit fixtures with steady calm. Cameras clicked, recording his every step. Emily watched from the back, heart pounding as she followed him into the lobby afterward. They found an empty corner, away from reporters jostling near the front entrance. Emily's voice was low but intense. Do you regret bringing this into the open? Nathan closed his eyes for a moment, as if pulling the afternoon into himself. When he spoke, his tone was a quiet resonance. Yes, I regret waiting so long. That silence was mine to break sooner. She nodded, tears brimming. I worried I was dragging you back into a world you left for good. He reached for her hand, offering a gentle squeeze. I left it to protect myself. I stayed away to avoid the shame, the gossip. But part of me stayed because I believed justice mattered more than comfort. Emily's eyes sharpened, reflecting the room's bright lights around them. And now his smile was slight but genuine. Now, I choose to rebuild, not just personally, but for everyone who suffered when power went unchecked. A hush fell between them as an aide approached Nathan with a microphone poised. Reporters clustered just beyond the glass doors, pressing forward for a statement. Nathan turned, face set with newfound resolve. He stepped forward under the glare of camera lights, the marble floor echoing his steps. Emily stood just behind him, her presence a steady anchor. "I did not choose to return to that seat," Nathan told the assembled press, voice carrying through the marble hall. "But I do choose to rebuild it. I choose transparency, accountability. This company will be different." Flashbulbs popped like distant thunder. Emily watched him stand tall, unshielded, but unbowed. In that moment, she realized that Nathan was no longer seeking restitution. He was forging a new beginning for them all. As the crowd pressed in, she slipped an arm through his, and together they faced the future. Every wavering chair in that grand room, a testament to what happens when the right people finally decide to stand firm. The morning air was cool as Emily made her way through the final preparations at Hearthlight Community Center. The sign above the door, freshly polished bronze, read Hearthlight in elegant script, and beneath it, etched in smaller letters, "Dedicated by those who believe change begins on the ground." She paused, hand resting lightly on the metal, feeling its smooth edges beneath her fingertips. This building had been a derelict shell when she and Nathan first saw it. Now it pulsed with warmth and hope. Inside, children bustled in brightly painted rooms. One group arranged donated furniture into a reading nook, while another rehearsed a short play about perseverance. Volunteers once the same, lost youth they had guided, moved with confident purpose. Their laughter echoed through the halls like a chorus of triumph. Today was Scholarship Day. The first awards would go to the young people who had graduated from Hearthlight's programs, their scholarships funded by local businesses and private donors who had been inspired by the project's success. Emily checked her clipboard one last time, smoothing her skirt before stepping onto the makeshift stage in the main hall. A mosaic backdrop, composed of hundreds of small, hand-drawn tiles by community school children, depicted scenes of repair, learning, and shared meals, none of them grand monuments, but each a snapshot of lives rebuilding. The scholarship recipient, a quiet boy named Marcus, stood at the edge of the stage, holding the microphone with trembling hands. His dark eyes flicked toward the audience and then back to Emily. She offered a reassuring nod. Marcus inhaled deeply. "I never thought I could go to college," he said, voice wavering. "If it weren't for Ms. Carter and Mr. Nathan, I wouldn't believe I had a chance." His words hung in the air, fragile but true. The room erupted in applause, chairs scraping back on the floor, volunteers and families rising to their feet. Emily watched the crowd. Her mother sat in the front row, eyes bright but peaceful, as if she could finally exhale after years of worry. The sight stabbed Emily's heart with the sweetness of victory and relief. Her mother's oxygen tank sat quietly beside her, no longer the symbol of fear, but a reminder of endurance. After the presentation, Emily stepped off the stage and made her way through clusters of smiling families. Each handshake, each word of gratitude, felt like a brick laid in the foundation of something lasting. She saw Nathan at the back, standing near the doors, wearing a crisp white shirt that mirrored the light flooding in. He held something in his hands, but she couldn't see what it was yet. When the ceremony wound down, volunteers began clearing the stage, but Emily slipped past them out the side door into the small courtyard behind the center. The sky was a pale blue, streaked with wisps of cloud. A few leaves drifted silently to the ground, carried on a breeze that rustled the leaves of a maple tree planted the week before. Nathan sat on a wooden bench, the same one they had used during early meetings, now freshly sanded and oiled. He looked up as she approached, eyes soft. "I have something for you," he said, standing and extending a small wooden frame. Inside the frame was an old photograph of her father, young and strong, standing beside Emily and her mother outside the print shop that once housed his livelihood. Tucked beside the photo was the letter he had written before the merger, the one Nathan discovered buried in the company archives. Emily's breath caught as she took it, tracing the handwriting she had read countless times. Her fingers lifted the letter gently. She recognized the words immediately. "If one day you meet someone who helps you believe you can rebuild from scratch, do not hesitate." Her father's promise to his daughter, preserved by someone who had never met him. Tears blurred her vision. She looked up at Nathan, gratitude warring with something deeper in her chest. "You remembered," she whispered. He nodded, eyes unguarded. "I promised him I would. And I promised you I'd help you build something that matters." Emily folded the letter back, but kept the photograph in her hand. The world narrowed to the two of them in that quiet courtyard. She felt the weight of everything they had endured, the loss, the betrayal, the long nights of doubt, and the miracle of what they had created together. Her voice trembled with emotion she had refused to show all day. "I don't know if I could have done any of this without you." Nathan's lips curved in a gentle smile. He reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "You did all the work. I just stood beside you." She let out a shaky laugh, and for a moment, they simply held each other's gaze in the soft autumn light. Beyond them, children's laughter drifted from inside the center, proof that lives continued to be changed. Nathan stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper meant only for her. He said words that felt like the closing of a long chapter and the opening of a new one. "I don't need the spotlight. I just need to be a part of your world." And in that moment, with the plaque above the door and the faces of hundreds who had found hope within those walls, Emily knew he meant every word. They stood together in the courtyard, two people who had traversed a landscape of injustice and betrayal, now grounded in a shared promise of rebuilding and forgiveness. They didn't need fame or fortune. They had each other and a place that would never be old again. 3 months had passed since the ribbon cutting at Hearthlight Community Center, yet every evening the building glowed like a lantern in the quiet neighborhood off Brevard Road. Emily no longer lived in her modest Grove Hill apartment. She had moved in with her mother in a 2-bedroom closer to her night classes. Still, each week she returned to Hearthlight to teach her capstone workshop for graduating seniors, sharing lessons on resume writing, basic home repairs, and financial planning. The students called her Ms. Carter now, but sometimes, in quieter moments, she caught themselves drifting into the habit of saying teacher or mentor, and she let it be. It was early April, and the days had grown warm enough to fling open the tall windows lining the workshop room. Tulips planted in recycled tin cans bobbed their heads in the breeze along the sill. Emily was arranging a table of printouts when a soft voice interrupted her. "Ms. Carter, will Mr. Nathan be coming back to teach?" She paused, turning. The student, a lanky boy named Jerome, held a notebook pressed to his chest, eyes hopeful. Emily pressed her lips together, offering a gentle smile. "He's been busy," she said, "but I'm sure he'll drop by soon." During the break, she slipped out to Hearthlight Cafe, the small coffee shop the center had opened to sustain its programs. The cafe's pale green walls were adorned with student artwork landscapes of Asheville's rolling hills, portraits of hands at work. A single row of wooden tables lined the window, each carved with names of donors and volunteers. The vinyl apron in her hand snagged slightly on her sweater as she surveyed the empty room. Sunlight streamed through the front window, catching motes of dust in its golden path. She ordered her usual black coffee, medium roast, and turned to find a seat. The barista smiled and placed the cup on the counter. Behind her, the cafe door swung open before she could step forward. Nathan stood there, hair grown a little longer at the collar, rolled sleeves of his crisp shirt, revealing forearms that had fixed countless chairs, patched walls, and now poured lattes in quiet practice. He wore the cafe apron, its pockets brushed with stray grains of coffee grounds. She didn't need to say a word. He moved toward the table nearest the window, lifting one chair to leave room. She walked over and set her tote bag on the adjacent seat. He nodded once, as if greeting an old friend after a journey. She sat, the warmth of the wooden chair familiar beneath her fingers. They sat in companionable silence, eyes occasionally drifting together to the golden spill of afternoon light across the floor. She lifted her coffee, fingers curling around the warm mug, listening to the gentle hiss of the espresso machine behind the counter. Outside, a breeze stirred the newly unfurled leaves of the maple tree planted last autumn in the courtyard. After a moment, Nathan reached into the pocket of his apron and pulled out a small wooden box. He placed it in front of her, the lid secured by a simple leather hinge. Emily's breath caught as she lifted the lid. Inside lay a delicate porcelain figure, a young woman standing tall, one hand lifting a flickering lamp high above her head. The glaze caught the light, making the lamp's flame glow like captured sunshine. Around the base was engraved a single line of script to the one who lit my way back. Emily's fingers trembled as she lifted the statue. The weight of it was more than the heft of porcelain. It held every step of their journey. Every late night in that apartment, peeling off old wallpaper. Every moment of doubt. Every stitch in the tapestry they had woven from broken threads. Her eyes filled as she looked up at Nathan, whose face was calm but shining with emotion. He cleared his throat softly. "You brought light back into my life. When I was erased, you reminded me that someone sees me, someone believes in me." She placed the statue gently on the table between them, its flame lifting toward the sky. "I needed you as much as you needed me," she said, voice steady despite the tears. "Without you, I might still believe I was alone." He reached across and covered her hand with his. "We aren't alone anymore." Outside, the cafe bell chimed as a family entered, their voices muted by the glass door. Emily tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, letting the moment settle over them like a gentle rain. The aroma of coffee mingled with the faint scent of spring blossoms drifting in through the open window. They sat together, silent but present, sharing warmth without words. In that hush, the past's shadows felt distant, eclipsed by the promise of new days. The lamp in her hand, the cafe behind them, and the soft promise of tomorrow all converged in a single moment of peace. They did not need to be the same to stand together. They only needed to look in the same direction. A single lamp flickers in the empty hallway long after the others have gone dark. Its warm glow a quiet promise that even the smallest light can hold the night at bay. In that hush, you realize that courage isn't loud. It's the choice to extend kindness when no one's watching, to trust again after trust is broken. Justice doesn't arrive on trumpets. It unfolds in soft decisions we make each morning. And sometimes, the greatest wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the moments we choose to see each other's humanity. As the lamp's glow steadies, you wonder what small light you might carry into your own dark corners,